Thank you. So last summer, I found myself driving in a minivan with 3 small kids all the way from Montreal back to Atlanta. So we had some time in the car. And when we dropped out of cell phone range, I started looking for something on the radio. And I just happened to stumble on NPR. And that's when I heard Evan Thomas being interviewed for Fresh Air on the program. And it was a fascinating interview. Evan was discussing his latest book on the decision to use atomic weapons to end World War II. The movie Oppenheimer was about to be released, so the timing was perfect. By the way, who has seen Oppenheimer? Oh, there we go. It's a good timing too, since they cleaned up at the Oscars last night. I was captivated by the psychology behind this world-changing event. So now, thanks to the Institute of Leadership and Social Impact, the Denning Program, and Georgia Tech, we now have one of the best historians in the country on stage with us tonight. Evan Thomas is one of the most respected historians and journalists writing today. He is the best-selling author of 10 other works of nonfiction, and his latest is Road to Surrender, 3 Men and a Countdown to End World War II. Thomas researched the diaries of U.S. Secretary of War Henry Stimson, Japanese Foreign Minister Togo, and Army Air Force General Carl Tui Spatz, contemplating the immense weight of their historic decision. In this immersive, surprising, moving account, Thomas lays out the behind-the-scenes thoughts, feelings, motivations, and decision-making of 3 people who changed history. He was an editor and writer at Newsweek for 24 years, writing over 100 cover stories, and appears regularly on TV and radio. Thomas has also won numerous journalism awards, including a National Magazine Award in 1998. In 2005, his 50,000-word narrative of the 2004 election was honored when Newsweek won a National Magazine Award for Best Single-Topic Issue. Thomas is a fellow of the Society of American Historians and has taught writing at both Princeton and Harvard. He is a graduate of Harvard and the University of Virginia Law School. Please welcome him.
John?
So, as you know, you and I can sit here and talk about this for hours, which we're not going to do. So we're going to keep it high level, and I want to get, our students, they're really, really good at solving technical problems. If it's writing code, if it's solving engineering equations, if it's doing business case studies. And I want to get them a little out of their comfort zone and think big picture. So for those of them who don't know, and there is a baseline here with the Oppenheimer movie, talk us through the end of World War II. From the U.S. perspective, what were they facing in Japan?
We had a problem. We had defeated Germany, which started World War II, but we had not defeated Japan. And we were the United States, preparing to invade Japan, and waiting for us, for the U.S. forces, were over 1 million men on the beaches of this island, and southernmost island. And along with 7,000 kamikaze planes. You know what a kamikaze plane is? It's where a pilot just flies his plane into the ship or into the target. And so it was going to be a bloodbath. It was going to be the greatest invasion in the history of mankind, and the bloodiest by far. We had invaded a couple of islands before this, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. You may have heard of those battles. Iwo Jima is a little tiny island that cost us 7,000 Marines. Okinawa, a little bit bigger, that cost us 12,000 Marines. This was going to cost us 250,000, 500,000, 1 million men in those days, mostly men. So what are we going to do? Well, technology had given us an alternative called the atom bomb. This is a brand new thing. Just experimented with the first time that July. Those of you who've seen the movie know about this. A scientist named Oppenheimer developed this weapon and tested it in the deserts of New Mexico. And we had 2 bombs. And so a decision was made to use them. Now, the problem is that to save our men, we were going to kill a lot of civilians. The estimate from Oppenheimer at the meeting was that we would kill 20,000 civilians with the first one. We actually killed 70,000 instantly and another 70,000 more slowly. We dropped the second one, and this one killed 35,000, and then another 35,000 more soldiers. So that is a big death toll. They weren't all civilians. Many of them were soldiers actually, but there's an awful lot of civilian death. Now, did the President of the United States get together with his aides and say, should we drop this bomb? What do you think? They didn't. It was a foregone conclusion. They knew they were going to drop it. They spent $2 billion building it. They had all these soldiers who were going to die if they didn't use it. There was some debate about the future of the bomb, and we'll get to that. But there was no debate about whether to drop it or not. They didn't realize quite how awful it was going to be. And we can get to this too. They didn't really want to know how awful it was going to be. But they just dropped it. There was really no... Now, I'm going to shut up here in a second, but just because they didn't think hard about or didn't debate dropping it doesn't mean that it didn't gnaw at them. And one bit of evidence that I saw in the diary of the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, was kind of the chairman of the board of the atom bomb, on the morning that he showed the photographs of Hiroshima, which was the first target. He showed the photographs to the president. This is what Hiroshima actually looks like. What did Hiroshima look like? The inside of an ashtray. 4 square miles, just nothing there. On that morning, when he showed those photographs to the president, he had a heart attack. Now, that might be a coincidence. He's a 77-year-old guy, but I don't think so. It's obvious from his diary that he was torn apart by this.
So let's go back a little bit, because we have a very technically savvy crew here. Let's talk about the idea of American exceptionalism and the belief that we can use technology to actually save lives. And so by that I mean the B-17 and the B-29, both of whom were made by Boeing, one of our corporate sponsors, by the way.
So this decision the non-decision I just described to you, grows out of another decision. The problem in this case was World War I. World War I, as many of you know, was a grotesque trench warfare. Some of you may have seen movies, just disgusting. In the trenches, deadlocked, poison gas, thousands of soldiers dying in a day. And there were some smart guys after the war who said, we don't want to do that again. There's another way to win wars. And that was driven by technology. There was a new thing called the bomber, a plane that could fly from the sky, this is in the 1930s, and could drop bombs. And the thinking was, we don't have to fight these terrible trench wars with a lot of soldiers getting killed. We just have to fly over the capital city and drop a few bombs, and the other side will surrender. Specifically, they thought they could drop the bombs on these nodes like power plants, bridges. Just find a few targets, knock those out, and the other side will surrender. Great idea. There's a book written about this called The Bomber Mafia, about these young guys who had this idea. And they had this new plane, the B-17, the big bomber, 4-engine bomber. Now, I should recommend to you a show called Masters of the Air, which is on right now on Apple, which vividly gets at what happened here. What happened was, so they have a scientific idea. We have this bomber, just hit a few targets, and we had something called the Norden bomb sight, a marvelous bit of technology, circa 1935, an analog computer, which could drop bombs with remarkable accuracy by loading in wind speed, airspeed, altitude, all that. It worked great on a clear day over Kansas. Over Germany in 1943, with German fighters shooting at you, and flak, you know what flak is? Anti-aircraft guns shooting up at you. Didn't work at all. Almost all the bombs missed. In fact, most bombs didn't come within a mile of the target. And so, as a result, our guys were getting shot out of the air. And again, I recommend the show Masters of the Air. Just to give you a taste of it, the requirement in 1943 was a crew of a B-17 had to fly 25 missions before they could come home. You didn't make 25 missions. Nobody made 25 missions. They all died. It was not quite the kamikazes of Japan, where they're intentionally diving into the enemy, but the odds were against you. So here is America. Now, interestingly, and at the same time, the British were also bombing Germany. They made a different moral and technical decision. We bombed by day with this Norden bomb sight, hoping to aim not at civilians, but at military targets, power plants, train yards, military targets, not at civilians. They called it precision bombing. It was totally imprecise. It didn't work. The British made a different moral decision because the Germans had bombed their cities, including London and the Blitz. The British said, "To heck with this precision bombing. We're going to bomb their cities too." Moral equality. They bomb our cities, we're going to teach them a lesson. We're going to give them a taste of their own medicine. We'll bomb their cities. They bombed at night, where they didn't have to be as accurate, because it's at night. All they had to do was find a city. They weren't looking for a marshalling yard or a power plant. They just wanted to hit Berlin or Hamburg. And so they dropped their bombs at night, wildly inaccurate, killed a lot of civilians, and they called it morale bombing. They were intentionally trying to break the morale of the German people by killing them. They call the term, technology always loves terms that are sort of antiseptic. It was known as dehousing. We were going to dehouse the German population. Right. So two civilized people, the British, the United States, kind of different approaches. American exceptionalism, oh no, we're not going to aim at civilians, we're going to use our superior technology, just hit the military targets, but it doesn't work. And of course we end up killing a lot of civilians. The British, we have moral equivalence here, we're going to just bomb the cities. In the end, they killed about an equal number of civilians because the technology didn't work. And we never quite admitted to what we were doing. At the very end of the war, somebody said the United States engaged in a terror bombing, and that was upsetting to us. And one of the guys I wrote about, General Spaatz, he was the strategic commander in Europe, in charge of all the bombing. And he had the hard job every night of sending these crews out there, where a lot of them died. And also he knew he was killing a lot of civilians. And on the night that we bombed Dresden, which is this beautiful city in Germany, medieval city, the Germans and the Americans bombed it and flattened it with a firestorm. General Spaatz blew $1,700 in a poker game. That was a third of his salaries. His assistant had to write Mrs. Spaatz that her husband had just blown a third of his year's salary on a poker game. She understood. She understood, because she understood the pressure that he was under, how tough this was to get all these people killed night after night. Your people, their people, a lot of dead people. And of course, he was given the order he's in my book because he was given the order to drop the atom bomb. He said, if you're going to make me kill 100,000 people, I want to see an order in writing. He required a written order. And it bothered him to the end of his days. His granddaughter told me that he couldn't sleep at the end of his life. He would go around humming, and he just couldn't sleep. It just tortured him, the thought of having killed all these civilians. He was duty-bound. He didn't refuse to do the order. He didn't complain about it. He did his duty, but it tore him apart.
So these crews on the bombers, by the way, probably most, 18 to 25?
Yeah, they're basically your age.
Your age.
Your age.
Was there any instances of them not dropping their bombs where they're supposed to, or not dropping the bombs at all, or returning to base?
Yeah. They're human. And one of the problems they had was the pilots, when you turned over, the plane would fly to the target, and the bomber would turn the plane over to the bombardier with his Norden sight, and you're looking at it for about 3 minutes over the target. They dropped the bombs too soon. Can you imagine what it's like? 3 minutes is a long time when you're flying on a straight line and people are trying to kill you. A lot of people are trying to kill you. And so they started dropping them too soon. That's one of the reasons why they missed. They tried using technology, radar. But the radar was primitive. It didn't work. Now, they solved this problem in Japan. Curtis LeMay, well, I have to back up for 1 second. The other problem they had was that the planes were aborting, going back with mechanical problems. They were faking it. Like, when you're growing up, you fake sick so you can avoid going to school. That's what they were doing. They were saying, we got a mechanical problem. So it got up to 25% of the crews were turning around and coming home with, quote, mechanical problems. So the commander, Curtis LeMay, said, I'm going to fly in the lead plane, and nobody turns back. And their abort rate dropped from 25% to a real abort rate, which is about 5%, because they talk about follow the leader. Now, he's a pretty brave guy to do this, also a very hard-bitten, tough guy, a controversial guy in later life. But he gets sent to Japan. And by now they think they're going to try again with precision bombing. It doesn't work. They have a new bomber, the B-77, have technology again. The B-17 was yesterday's bomber. Now they have a B-29, can fly 30,000 feet above the Japanese fighters, above Japanese aircraft, anti-aircraft fire. This will be great. They discovered something called the jet stream. They never knew what the jet stream was until they flew up there at 30,000 feet, and it blew the planes off target. Because of the jet stream, the planes are off target. They missed. So LeMay has an idea. We're not going to do it at 30,000 feet. We're going to come in at 7,000 feet, take all the guns off the planes, we won't need them, and we're going to drop incendiaries, napalm.
Which was contrary to the whole point of the plane in the first place.
Right. The plane's designed to fly high. Oops, doesn't work. Okay, new plan. We're going to fly in at 7,000 feet, and we're going to drop this new technology again, napalm. The incendiary bombs have been improving, quote, over the course of World War II. And we had this jelly the bomb would open, and this basically gasoline napalm jelly would drop down and ignite. And on the first night we did this in Tokyo on March 10th, 1945, we killed 100,000 people in 6 hours. More people died in 6 hours than in the history of warfare.
Including the atomic bombs.
Including the atomic bombs.
Wow.
This is before the atomic bombs. This is a little bit of backdrop. I said there wasn't a big debate about dropping the atom bomb. Well, we'd already killed 100,000 people in one night with napalm. It was so bad that the pilots, this is a little grim, excuse me, could smell the burning flesh and were nauseated by it and had trouble scrubbing it off them. Now, did they complain? Actually, was there a public reaction? Did the people of the United States recoil in horror? No. It wasn't advertised that they killed that many people, but you look at the newspaper, it talks about flames leaping high, 16 square miles of Tokyo demolished. Well, what the hell do you think was happening? We were killing a lot of civilians. The American people went along with it. Why? They wanted the war to end. Their loved ones, they wanted them home. They wanted to start their lives again. We had lost by then about 300,000 Americans, and that's a lot of people. You know, we wanted the war to end. People wanted their lives back.
When you say lost 300,000, is that killed or
killed?
casualties?
That's killed. I think that the World War II war dead was a little over 300,000. Nothing compared to
Russia.
Russia, which was like 20 million.
But keep in mind these numbers when we say 300,000. It's hard to conceptualize that. Just so happened to look up total enrollment at the University System of Georgia is about 300,000 students. So keep that in mind when you hear these numbers. It's incredible.
Yeah, it starts to affect everybody's lives.
So basically what we're talking about is they keep trying these new technologies with little to no success. People are dying on both sides. Why did they start the atomic research program?
So I have to go back in history a little bit here. And this is in Germany, in the early 1930s, there are some physicists, and they realize that they can, by splitting the atom, release this untold energy. That they can make this incredibly devastating weapon. They realize this. They realize that there's a process called chain reaction. These are things that you students understand a lot better than history major I do. But suffice it to say, they found a way to at least have the potential to unleash the energy of an atom with devastating effect. Now, this is in Germany. I like to say that on April 7th, 1933, Germany lost the war. Why do I pick this date? The United States doesn't get involved in World War II until 1941. The European War doesn't even begin until 1939. But I say they lost it in 1933. Why? Because Hitler, you know who Hitler was, this monstrous dictator who was running Germany. He'd just come to power. And one of the first things he does is to outlaw Jewish people from government. He was a racial horror show who wanted to basically eliminate all the Jews of Europe. And as most of you know, probably all of you know, before he was done, he had killed 6 million Jews in Germany, the Holocaust. But this is before all that. But he wants them all out of government. Well, what happens? Their best scientists are Jewish. They leave. They go to Britain and the United States. So Hitler kicks out the very people who are working on making an atom bomb for him. Now, it takes the British and the Americans a while to figure out. Meanwhile, the work continues on an atom bomb in Germany, but his best scientists are gone. Albert Einstein, you know who he is. He, this great physicist, he alerts President Roosevelt in 1939, hello, the Germans are building this secret weapon that is going to change war. You need to wake up and get going. And Roosevelt does. And he starts this process that ended up in the movie, well, half of you have seen Oppenheimer. It's called the Manhattan Project. It starts really in 1939, gets going in 1942. By 1945, they built a couple of these weapons, and they are unleashing the power of the atom. And the Germans could have had it first, and we'd all be speaking German if they did, because believe me, Hitler would have used it for sure, without doubt. But he stupidly got rid of his best scientists.
And what I didn't know in your book was, didn't you say that the Japanese were also?
They were. This was publicly known in the physics world. It was known that this was at least theoretically possible, and people were working at it in a lot of places, including Japan. But it took an enormous resources to do this. Really, only the United States had the capacity to refine enough uranium and create enough plutonium. We built these giant factories using actually TVA projects in Tennessee and Washington to build these vast factories to refine the uranium that was used to build the bombs. It was a difficult process, a lot of trial and error, science at its best, and this movie's all about it. Incredible scientific achievement, and we got a couple of them and we used them.
So the decision is what fascinates me. Like you said, it wasn't like these guys sat around and said, should we or should we not use this? It was almost how and when.
Yeah.
So how did they come to this horrific calculus of, quote unquote, this is going to save lives? How did they rationalize that?
You know, if we were designing this in a class, we'd all have a meeting and we'd have whiteboards and we'd do pros and cons and, numbers. It's just not how it worked. Churchill and Roosevelt decided in the fall of 1944, look like we're going to get this weapon and we'll probably use it. That's as close as there is to a written decision to the British leader and the American leader. Agree, probably we're going to use it. The only time it's ever, written down. Roosevelt is dead, but Harry Truman, the new president, comes in. He's sort of presented with this thing, and he doesn't say, it's the absence of a negative. He doesn't say no. He doesn't say yes, he just doesn't say no. An order goes out in late July that says, and it's a military order, we'll bomb the following 4 cities with, depending on weather, with bombs as made ready. Bombs as made ready. We had 2, we were building a 3rd, we tested 1, so the building a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But just not a debate about, because it was self-evident that if we didn't use them, we were going to have this invasion, and hundreds of thousands of Americans were going to die.
And not just Americans. Talk about the calculus on the other side. We're not just talking about Japanese either, are we?
No, but let's talk about the Japanese for a second.
Okay.
The Japanese were going to die, obviously, in greater numbers than the Americans. They were willing to die. They had, I mentioned these kamikaze planes. And there was a weird culture in Japan, a kind of a death wish. It's hard to know how serious they were, but they talked this way, just to give you an example of how the Japanese leaders were thinking in 1945. This is August 10th, 1945. Japan is run by something called the Supreme War Council. 6 people basically run the show. There's an emperor, but the 6 guys, 5 military leaders, 1 civilian. And they have just gotten word that a second atomic bomb has just been dropped on a second Japanese city. You would think that would be enough. The war minister, General Anami, says, wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if the entire country was to perish like a cherry blossom, like a flower?
So wait a minute, back up. The United States drops the first bomb,
Right.
and the reaction from the Japanese government is...
Denial. Don't want to believe it.
Wow.
Even though they've been trying to build one themselves. Now, they know, but they are so invested in fighting this desperate last stand, they don't want to believe it. Never underestimate human denial. Now, the emperor is starting to go, whoa, they're going to be coming after me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he's starting to wake up. But in the Japanese system, although he's the emperor, and he's a divinity, and he's a god, he floats so high up there, he, in a way, doesn't have any authority. The authority's all in the military guys. It's an authoritarian government, really run by the military. And they want to fight to the end. Some of it is this mystic death wish, but some of it is rational. You have to sort of follow the bouncing ball here. The Japanese know that they've been defeated. Their fleet's been sunk. Their soldiers have been killed. 60 of their cities now have been fired on. 60. They know they're defeated, but they think that if they can force us to invade and kill a lot of us, hundreds of thousands of us, we will agree not to occupy their island, no war crimes trials for the leaders, and preserve the emperor. In other words, the old system, they want to preserve their system, even though they're defeated, because they know if they surrender unconditionally, if they just give up, we're going to hang their we're going to hang them, which we did. We're going to hang their generals. We're going to get rid of their emperor. No, we did not do that. And we're going to occupy their country, which we did. So it's not totally irrational. They think if we can just add a Japanese word for it, shiketsu, bleeding strategy, the bleeding strategy. If they could bleed us enough, we would give up, say you can keep your island. So that's what they're hoping when we drop the first bomb. Well, maybe they'll still invade. Even after we drop the second bomb, they're going, well, maybe they don't have a third.
Well,
But by now the emperor is going, I think they got a third and he's coming for me. So the emperor, breaking precedent, this is very abnormal, he calls this sacred meeting and he says, hey fellas, we're going to surrender. And it takes another 5 days. There's a coup d'etat. It's a very close thing. It almost doesn't work, but eventually they do surrender.
so go back to that a second. When the emperor decided we're going to surrender, this is too much. One, how many more bombs was the United States prepared to drop?
Truman had given the order to drop a third bomb on Tokyo. The Japanese find this. He gives the order. This is on August 15th. The bomb would have been ready on August 20th. The Japanese surrendered on August 15th. So they came within 5 days of having a third bomb dropped on them. We wouldn't have dropped it directly on the palace. We were going to create something called the scare radius. What's the scare radius? The radius where the explosion, the flash, and the bang is so great that it will scare the emperor into surrender.
So even after the second bomb was dropped at him, you're saying there was some guys in the Japanese War Council that tried to almost kidnap the emperor?
The plan was there was going to be a coup attempt where they were going to put in a military government and they were going to they were not going to kill the emperor, but they were going to kidnap him and take him up to a secret redoubt up in the mountains, a secret fortress up in the mountains. And he overrides that. And it's a very close thing. I mean, there's so close that some soldiers kill the head of the Imperial Guard and are running through the palace looking for a recording of the emperor's surrender speech, which is going to be given at noon the next day. He's recorded a speech saying, we surrender. They're trying to find the record to break it so that he can't surrender. They can't find it. It's hidden. And so their leader commits Harry Carey, and the broadcast is made the next day, and Japan finally surrenders. The emperor says, and as famously says in his speech, the war is not going quite as well as expected. They've been nuked twice in 7 days.
So you have this new technology that's coming out that's put to horrific uses, right? One question some of our students had was, why wasn't more research done into the ramifications before the atomic bomb was used?
This is a really interesting question because these atom bombs produce radiation, which is lethal. Now, they knew that, but they didn't want to know too much. It's a question of, this was a bit of a puzzle because we know now that the fallout from a nuclear bomb, the radiation that it expels, can kill you, and it's actually a pretty terrible death. Basically, your insides melt. We could have known all that. Some people did know it, but we didn't really want to know it because the president's scientific advisor, President Conant of Harvard, he was the president of Harvard, he had been involved in making secret gas, nerve gas and mustard gas in World War I, and we had not, neither side used gas in World War II. We've been so ghastly in World War I. And of course, with gas, the wind can blow the other direction. It can blow back on you. So no poison gas in World War II. And Conant was afraid if we got into a discussion about radiation, people would go, whoa, 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 whoa. That's like poison gas. And it would slow the whole process down. And he didn't want to do that.
So you have this, if I can use the word, very complicated relationship between science and government.
You sure do.
And so I don't know what you thought of the Oppenheimer movie, but you could see that the scientists were laser focused on getting this, they call it the gadget, correct?
A gadget.
They didn't call it a bomb, they called it a gadget. Let's get the gadget to work.
Yeah.
But the decision to use the gadget was out of their hands.
And that's how they rationalize it. Not our decision. But Oppenheimer is a fascinating character in this because he's obsessed. The thrill, the challenge of building the thing is so great. It's such a scientific challenge. It's so exciting. And they want the kind of glory and fame of having, people win Nobel Prizes for this kind of thing to, split the atom. How dramatic is that? So that there's a tremendous incentive, human incentive for them to do this. Now, it's going to kill a lot of people, but that's somebody else's decision. That's not our decision. Now, it's not that simple. There's a very moving scene in the movie, actually, but I remember it from the book, that after Oppenheimer announces that the atom bomb has worked and destroyed Hiroshima, they have a party. And Oppenheimer goes, it worked, and they cheer. He's like a prize fighter doing this. And then there's a party. And everybody gets drunk, and it's not a fun party. People are throwing up in the bushes. They're crying because they know what they've done. Now, they want to hope, because Oppenheimer's told them, hey, folks, we'll use this once and never again. One time. That'll be the end of war. We'll use this weapon once, or in this case, two bombs, but that'll be it. No more. War's over. They want to believe that. And in a way, that was true. Because we haven't used the bomb since.
Because it was so horrific.
Because it was so horrific.
So I'm going to read you two quotes, and I want your reaction to these. The first one is, we are drifting towards a catastrophe beyond comparison. Albert Einstein, after the first bomb was dropped in 1946. Here's the second quote. My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. Sam Altman, chief executive of OpenAI, who made ChatGPT.
Right, so OpenAI, AI, that's the new atom bomb in some ways, or at least potentially. Now, they're different, and we need to talk about this, because they're not the same. But they are a scientific invention that potentially has the capacity to end us all. The sci-fi scenario that you're all aware of is we make AI so great, we make it like sentient beings, that the machines decide, we don't need humans, let's enslave them, or just get rid of them. That's the sci-fi scenario of AI. I hope it's a far-fetched sci-fi scenario, but it's not out of the question, and people today are starting to worry about it, think about it. I don't know how much you're aware, but there's a conversation going on about this right now. Whoa, what happens if we can't control, if AI becomes a Frankenstein monster that we can't control, it gets out of our control? This debate has definitely begun.
And it's interesting you use the word Frankenstein monster. Didn't Secretary of War Stimson say that exact same thing about the amount of bombs?
I was really struck when I was reading the diary of, this is Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, and as I said, he's sort of the chairman of the board. He's the head of the project. He's writing in his diary, the bomb was known in Los Alamos as the gadget, kind of this cute little term for a terrible weapon. In his diary, Stimson refers to it as the awful, the terrible, the diabolical, the evil. He knows what it is, and a Frankenstein monster.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to read you another quote and get your take on this. There's little dispute among scientists, industry experts, and Pentagon officials that the U.S. will within the next few years have fully autonomous lethal weapons. And though officials insist humans will always be in control, experts say advances in data processing speed and machine-to-machine communications will inevitably relegate people to supervisory roles. That was an AP article in November 2023.
Well, let's hope we're good supervisors. And that begs that there's a lot of room there.
There's a lot of potential supervisors.
You are. I'm looking at the supervisors. You're it. Because it's your generation, not mine, I helped, my generation helped create this mess, but you will inherit it. And you're going to be in charge. You will be, I'm being literal, you will be the supervisors. There's no, AI is here. There's no turning back. And how we supervise or run AI or use it, that's going to be the most single important question of your lives.
So there was a doctrine called MAD, M-A-D, mutually assured destruction, meaning if once more countries got nuclear weapons, if one entity used it, the other would reply, everybody dies, there's no point to any of this, right? That's
why there hasn't been another.
Right. But do you see an equivalent of that with AI?
I think nation state to nation state, maybe, because, we could say to the Chinese, if you unleash this weapon on us, we'll unleash it on you, and you have mutual assured destruction. Something like this is going on right now with cyber. Because, atom bombs or nuclear weapons are not the only threat. I should say parenthetically about the nuclear weapons. The bombs used at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were terrible, they are about 1/200th of the size of a standard nuclear weapon that's beyond a submarine or a missile today. 1 megaton versus 20,000 tons of TNT. They've made nuclear weapons that are 1,000 times the size, 2,000 times. There was, I believe, a 50 megaton nuclear bomb that was once ignited by the Russians. So the scale of the bombs is a lot bigger, but that's parenthetically. Cyber. Already, each side, I say side, the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, appear to have the capacity to turn off each other's lights, to attack infrastructure in a really horrific way. There's been headlines about this recently because they found in our infrastructure Chinese malware that would give them the capacity to basically turn our lights off or poison our water or do whatever. The assumption is we can do the same to them, and so that's the cyber equivalent of mutual assured destruction. Don't do it to us because we're going to do it to you, and you have a kind of a standoff. I guess that's what's going on.
It seems like a slippery slope, though, because it seems like using a nuclear weapon is, unthinkable, and that's one thing. But inserting some AI into someone's infrastructure is a little more gray.
It is, and we already live in a world of cyber attacks.
Sure.
These ransom attacks, you are aware that, ransomware attacks, you're aware that right now people are having trouble with their medical bills. It's actually a big issue because a outlaw pirate group is extorting money. It's paid for in Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin. Which is a ransom. It's basically you hold people hostage. We're going to disrupt your systems, no more privacy unless you pay us money. So this United Healthcare is, I think, paying ransom to get these pirates out of their system. So it's already going on. There was 2 years ago, energy shortage in New Jersey because they shut down gas stations with one of these ransomware attacks. So we're seeing more of this already. There have been a couple of thousand ransomware attacks in the United States, or maybe it's global, in the last year, but more. And there's something to worry about. They're generally non-state actors doing it. It's generally criminals. But it may be criminals backed by governments. I'm not sure Putin is not supporting pirates in their attacks on us.
But Evan, these are still state actors or entities, right? What do you think about the fact that this new technology isn't really being developed by and for the government? It's developed in private industry.
Yeah, and
to make money.
Money. Some of you, again, to tell you what some of you already know, about 3 or 4 months ago, ChatGPT, the people who first introduced this idea that your AI could write your term papers, was developed by this ChatGPT, and they had been set up as a non-profit entity with this kind of high-minded idea that we're going to control it, and it'll be for the public good, and it will have checks on it. And the guy who had invented all this suddenly went off to Microsoft to make money on it. And all of his employees went with him. And so the company had to kind of rethink what they were doing. And what started out as a public-oriented, civic-minded, controlled, for the public good outfit suddenly becomes a profit-making outfit. Now, let's hope that the profit-making people are going to be disciplined and civic-minded and do the right thing for all of us. But, don't count on it.
No, I don't think so. And it kind of reminds me of, didn't Oppenheimer say after the war, well, we can control this if we put enough checks in it?
That was the idea. They had trouble getting arms control. Now, there has been some arms control.
Right.
There's a nuclear non-proliferation treaty. There's some arms control between it was very difficult to come by. It took a long time. It was incomplete. But they got the number of nuclear warheads down from like 50,000 to about 1,000 of serviceable ones. So there was, meaningful arms control. Now, 1,000 nuclear warheads is enough to end everything, really. But there was some arms control. Those treaties are expiring now, and so we have there 9 countries that can make nuclear weapons. The lid is coming off a little bit of that international system of control, not entirely. Mutual assured destruction is definitely, whatever the treaties are, there's still mutual assured destruction. But you got to keep that going.
Well, it was interesting. One of our students, we were discussing this, said, their generation, Gen Z, the fear, it's almost like the nuclear weapons are so overwhelming and so abstract that it's less tangible. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, well, the fear of malfunctioning electronics, the AT&T outage a few weeks ago, it disrupted everybody's lives. The power grid going down, which we talked about, AI replacing someone's job, etc., are more tangible in a way to her than a nuclear bomb.
Get used to it. We're going to see more of it. And now I do think that system, it's an offense-defense race. They talk about offense-defense spiral. I don't know if you study this at all. Offense usually beats defense, but defense is not unimportant, and you can see people learning how to fight back. Offense will stay ahead, but defense is significant, so that there will be all sorts of ways to fight back against. And you can see it, the U.S. government has been trying to disrupt these ransomware attacks with some success, I get it. Not complete success, we just had a big one. But that doesn't mean there isn't pushing back on it. Also, it's not in the government, it's in the interest of commerce to learn how to defend their companies against these things. And they're doing that. There are all sorts of companies out there already that exist to save you from malware.
So Christopher Nolan, the director of Oppenheimer, had an interesting quote. He said, AI is not the same as the bomb. but a cautionary tale. What do you think he means by that?
You know, history never repeats itself, but it does rhyme. And it's just that, it's a cautionary tale. It's not, it never is an exact parallel. But this race, I noticed in Henry Stimson's diary, he wrote about a contest between science and human beings. And he was hopeful that Americans were leading the world to a better moral place, to what he called the law of moral progress. That as time went on, democracy and freedom would make us a better people, and we would be more capable of making proper moral judgments. But he was worried that science would outrun that. That before we had these systems in place, or before we'd spread freedom and democracy, or as he saw it, Christian morality, to the world, that science and its evil temptations, its wicked temptations, would have outrun that, and people would succumb. You know, there's there German folk tales, the sorcerer's apprentice. There are legends about this, where people can't handle their new sorcery, and it comes back and bites them, and it gets out of control. That fear is an ancient fear, and has been around for a long time. I noticed that when I was working on this book, John Adams in 1790 worried that science was going to outrun human capacity to control science. So this is an old game, but it gets more intense, and all of you are at the pointy end of the spear because you're in science.
Do we have time for some questions?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's hear from them.
Q&A. So if you have questions, you can just raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Don't be shy.
Can you hear me? Questions, time for Q&A.
Here's one.
Hello, thank you for coming. I really enjoyed the talk. I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, from the Japanese perspective, like, post the first bomb and post the second bomb, was there any meaningful shift in the thinking of, like, the War Council? And I guess beyond that, what kind of, like, changed the Emperor's opinion on what was going on? Because I guess he was in Tokyo and he saw the city get firebombed and destroyed that way. What was different about this bomb than the previous firebombings to him?
Those are all good questions. So the War Council is 6 people, and they start out unanimously, no surrender. After the second bomb, it's 3-3. It's a tie. But in Japan, you have to operate by consensus, all 6. So they were just frozen. The emperor, meanwhile, in his palace down the road, he generally just sits there and does whatever the military tells him to do. But he's starting to get a little restless about this, and he's fearful that a third bomb is going to come at him. He's fearful partly because by accident we burned down most of the palace in May. We didn't need to, but the fire jumped the moat. So he's thinking, oh my God, I can be a target. So for the first time in his reign, in his life, with some help of my hero Togo, the foreign minister, the one civilian, he calls a special meeting in his bomb shelter, and he says, we're going to have to end this. And his military aides, they weep, they gnash their teeth, they fall down, but they know that the writing is on the wall. Now, it's not that simple because they don't simply surrender. They insist on the emperor having total control. The United States rejects that deal. Military falls apart again. As I said, there's a coup d'etat attempt. So it's super messy. But in a second meeting, the emperor says again, okay, we surrender. And at this time, the coup fails. General Anami, who I mentioned, commits seppuku, the old-fashioned way. And that finally is the end. It's messy and bloody.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much again for coming and speaking. It was really great to hear what you had to say. But as you mentioned previously, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So what is your take on what's happening with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and like how that kind of parallels a lot of what we saw in World War I and just leading to just the devastation of that?
So one of the issues in the Ukraine conflict is whether Putin is going to use tactical nuclear weapons. And he's been threatening, and just this week, that an article came out that we really were worried in the fall of 2022, so that's 18 months ago. We have been picking up our intelligence, listening in on Russian communications. Had heard a lot of chatter that if the Ukrainians broke through and took the Crimea and broke through Russian lines, as it looked like they were on the verge of doing 18 months ago, that the Russians were seriously thinking about using a tactical nuclear weapon. That would have been the first time since 1945. Now, when I say tactical nuclear weapon, what does that mean? Tactical means a battlefield weapon. It's small, but small is not that small. Small is probably Hiroshima size. It's 10,000, and it's got radiation. So small kills a lot of people. It's still a horrific thing. And we were really worried that the Russians were, we don't know how serious they were. We were listening to their chatter. In any case, Ukrainians did not take the Crimea. They did not break through. So we didn't come to the point where the Russians would use this weapon. But we pretty took it as a real possibility they would. I would guess right now the Ukrainians are falling back, partly because the United States is not giving them more support, because Congress is frozen on this. And I think the current thinking is to get an ugly deal sometime this year that would freeze things in place. The Russians would keep what they've taken so far in eastern Ukraine. They would hold on to the Crimea, but that Crimea would either join NATO, the alliance of European states, or get some kind of security guarantee from the United States and European countries saying to the Russians, okay, you can keep what you have, but if you go any further, then you're fighting all of Europe. That appears to be the likeliest deal, maybe sometime this year. That's kind of the best case. Now, the Ukrainians are going to have a say in this, and they've already rejected that deal. I think it's more likely they'll do it because they're starting to lose. Now, there's some technology coming in. The Ukrainians are going to start getting some F-16s soon, so maybe that'll shift the balance. But it looks like the Russians, just from their sheer size, the Russians have a bad army, badly trained. Ukrainians fought brilliantly against them. But Russia's 10 times the size of Ukraine in terms of industrial capacity. And they just can grind down, slowly grind down Ukraine until the Ukraine runs out of ammunition or soldiers. So it's unclear. I mean, there are a lot of wild cards. There's a nuclear site in the middle of Ukraine, which is in danger of going up, having an accident. A lot of bad things can happen here. If it's possible that the Russians will just keep grinding away and take Ukraine. If they do that, we don't know. Is this like Europe in the 1930s when Hitler takes the Ruhr and then Austria and then Czechoslovakia and keeps on going and takes France? Are we in that situation? I don't think so. But talk about history rhyming. If you had lived in Estonia now, if you lived in one of the Baltic countries, you'd be a little worried, or Finland. Finland and Sweden just joined NATO. They've been neutral countries. They just joined NATO, the European Alliance, North American Treaty Organization, because they're afraid of the Russians. Because Putin is behaving and sounding an awful lot, maybe not like Hitler, but as an authoritarian who's ambitious, wants more, megalomaniac, guy who has to be stopped. Yeah.
Thank you.
Couple questions down here.
Hi. This is probably an extension of the previous question because you talked about the UK dropping their strategy for how they drop bombs on Nazi Germany. We've spoken about the US. So I'm just curious about how Russia, during World War II, their strategy of dropping bombs, if you're familiar with that strategy, have they tried to evolve in that strategy, especially as it connects to now? Being that it's Women's History Month, a lot of people may not know about there are the 5,888 all-female Russian bombers. They were known as night witches, and they had wooden planes that they dropped about over 23,000 bombs on Nazis. And the Nazis hated them so badly, they gave them the term Nachtwitz and night witches, and pretty much said that, you know, if you managed to shoot one down, you would get a medal from Nazi Germany, because they just hated them so bad. They had a very strategy, and called night witches because the rotator on their airplanes, I mean, that was the only way you could know they were there, because they had such small planes in comparison to their male counterparts, and they were like wood, a lot of wood. So that's just from that particular regiment. But I just want to know what was Russia's strategy and how they bombed.
The Russians were fighting for their lives.
Mm-hmm.
When Germany invaded Russia in July 1941, it was a horrific thing, but it was especially horrific because the Germans were not taking prisoners. They would just turn the Russians out to starve to death. They would kill them if they were Jewish. They would kill them right away. If they were subversive in any way, they'd kill them right away. So the Russians were in a fight, literally, for their lives. And the Germans advanced all the way to the gates of Moscow, and killed and captured hundreds of thousands of Russians. So Russians were going to do whatever they possibly could to survive. When they finally started pushing the Germans back, and the flow started going the other way, the conquering Russians were as cruel as you can imagine. And one bit of evidence of this, which is, alert here, they had organized rape. The conquering Russian army would organize mass rape as they made their way into Germany.
Thank you. One more last question.
Hi, thank you for being here. I just have one question about commerce versus loyalty to your country. I'm wondering, with the thought that commerce can be subordinate to national loyalty, I'm wondering for your opinion on this, because we see the increasingly obvious scenario of commerce becoming more and more important than your own country that you're a part of, such as the new spacecraft that landed on the moon that was funded by business. I'm wondering, is it possible for individuals to stay loyal to their country more than businesses because of the pull towards getting a job done and getting it done good and getting it done efficiently? You see that NASA has very successful missions 50 years ago where they managed to put people on the moon, but now we're putting spacecraft on the moon that tips over and is unable to serve its function well. So I'm wondering, is it the sense of individuals being pulled too much by the greed of money that they're unable to get a job done good? They just want to get the job done.
A really complicated question here, obviously, as you should read Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk, who's at the center of this. Musk has created his own space company, which works much better than the government. The government got to the point so inefficient, so badly run. Now they use a lot of private contractors, but basically so badly run, they couldn't launch satellites anymore. They couldn't get to the moon. So a private contractor comes along and does it himself. Now, Musk is getting a lot of government contracts to do this, so that it's not as clean as one Musk over here and the government over there. It's more like that now. But there's always tension between making money and doing the public good. It's a tension that's never going to be resolved. You want to have a hopefully somewhat transparent government so we can watch all this going on, because there will always be excesses both ways. I don't think it's as simple as either the good guys in the government or the bad guys in the private sector do it, nor is it as simple as, well, the private sector's smarter, more nimble than the government, so they're going to do it better. It's messier than that. And it bears a lot of attention. And hopefully you can harness the good of both, the private initiative, private enterprise, driven by greed, which can be a good thing. Greed can be a good thing, pushing people, but at the same time, having public accountability, having government involved, having voters involved, having Congress involved, so it's not just the private sector doing whatever it wants. There's a balancing act there. It's hard to get it right. The United States gets it right sometimes, not at other times. But I will say, it's easy to criticize our own country. Nobody's ever gotten it better.
All right, one last question I have for you. It could be unfair in putting you on the spot. This theme we still go back to is this technology will save lives, right? Precision bombing, atomic weapons, AI. We can have autonomous drone planes will save the pilot's lives. It'll be more accurate. We'll have less civilian deaths. Given the data that you researched, do you think that using those horrific atomic bombs actually save lives?
Absolutely. I think the math is incontrovertible. I'll do the math for you. Those atom bombs killed about 200,000 people. Now, in Japan, if that war had not ended, many, many more than 200,000 were going to die of starvation. The Japanese were about to starve to death. They were down 500 calories a day. So, and we were going to invade, and it's just going to, I don't know, but in the millions. But not just the Japanese. In Asia, Japan had occupied a third of China, Southeast Asia, and people were dying there at the rate of 250,000 a month. So by stopping the war, we stopped a death toll. This is not Japanese or Americans. These are Indonesians, Chinese, Malaysians. They are dying at the rate of 250,000 a month. And when we stopped the war, the American food arrived. And the Americans, they can be bad guys, but they can be good guys. And we saved mass famine by bringing tons of rice and grain to this part of the world, and we saved literally millions of people.